Product Stacks is brought to you by Storyblock, one of the world's fastest growing headless CMSs. A headless CMS like Storyblock separates the back end from the front end. By moving to an API-based CMS like Storyblock, you can publish your content to any front end, whether that's your marketing website or directly inside your product. Developers love Storyblock because they can use it with any front-end framework they prefer and create components that can be reused anywhere as content blocks, cutting development time in half. Content teams are excited about the discussions feature built directly into Storyblock's visual editor. No more Slack or email threads to discuss content changes. Join 86,000 developers plus companies like Harvard Business School, Adidas, Netflix, Oatly, and Pizza Hut who all use Storyblock by trying a free demo at storyblock.com/department of product. Go to storyblock.com/department of product. That's Storyblock with a K at the end /department of product. Joining us today, we have Mohana from EA Games, and Mohana is a senior product manager. Thanks very much for taking some time out of your day to chat through your product stack with us.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, Mohana, I work in EA for the developer platform team. So basically, my team and my peers are mainly focused on building tools that can be used within the games. So any chat feature or any virtual economy that you see within any of the EA games, that our team has hands on that. So I've been in the PM for almost 5 years now with different kinds of experience in different industries, but mainly I've been on B2B teams, and this is where and this is also a team like where it's more B2B focused, like where we work with game studios that build games and try to provide them features and platform to develop their own games.
And what kind of features are you building at EA Games? Like, how does it fit into what would be a typical feature that you may have recently shipped?
One thing that we might have seen with some of the launches with EA, like we have a lot of multiplayer experiences.
Yeah.
So within EA, like there are like things like chat, there are things like able to find friends
Okay.
find friends to play multiplayer games with. So a lot of these features that you see are built by our teams, like where we shipped out an option for newer games to find people in different parts of the world and find someone who is available and someone who can play a game with, and also an option of like where you can only play with your friends or like play with the people that you want to have certain kind of level or certain kind of expertise in the games. So
Yeah.
those are all the different kinds of features that you see within the games that are built by our team.
Nice. So like the social elements of gaming is your responsibility. Yeah. And how does it compare to other product roles that you've had in the past that are perhaps not in gaming?
Yeah, this is very different area for me. I was previously working mostly in ads, so most of my experience has been like building ads and working with like B2B business areas to try to optimize for ads, measure ads, and also build recommendation systems, identify the different varieties and the different kinds of ads that are coming in the market. Yeah, it was a little bit different in terms of both of them are the B2B products. It's a little bit different in terms of like the scale and the level of depth that you need to understand between an ad product and a gaming product.
Yeah, I guess because gaming is more, I guess ads are still B2C in some ways. It's still a consumer product because the end consumer is a user. But I guess moving into something like gaming, it's such a consumer-based product. It's very, very different, I imagine. Okay, perfect. So before we delve into your product stack, what we've been asking people to do is to give us a bit more of a context as to like how their overall product process works. If you could just talk us through 3 key areas that we're asking folks to share with us. And the 3 main areas that we're interested in are roadmaps and strategy. So how do you develop your roadmap and strategy just at a high level? And then secondly, what does a typical team look like? What does your team look like? And why does it look like that? And then finally, what does your software development process look like in your team as well? So they are the 3 main areas. And perhaps if we can start with your roadmap and strategy, and if you could just give us a flavor of how you decide what goes on your roadmap and how you make strategic decisions at your role in EA Games.
Of course, yeah. So in in EA and also in the places that I worked before. So the vision and mission are something that is like the foremost important one, like very long, very far forward looking, and we all where we spend most of the time on. Like at least like when I'm onboarding into a team or when I'm looking at the team, like I always want to make sure that the vision and mission are relevant and are also still relevant in the context of the company and also in the terms of the market. Like I can give an example like where in my previous role, like when I was working for a team, when I have a vision and mission, but it kind of COVID hit at that time, and like is the vision still make sense because like you are in art tech, like does arts make sense in terms of the like having the same kind of vision of like showing the arts in a appropriate way, like that it makes sense. Like some part of it does and some part of it doesn't. So you need to be very mindful of like what where you are in the context of like uh, economy, in context of the company. So it's very crucial to understand like the company strategy and vision, and that is where the top down part comes in terms of setting up the vision and mission for the team. And most of the thing as a product manager, and that's the part that I enjoy, is like it's a way where you can define the vision and mission like by going through what's happening in terms of like the competitors and also what's happening in terms of the product gaps in the market and thinking through that and like coming up with a vision which and selling that vision. And that's another part, but that is more important because vision is not like a one time setup. Like it's also needs a lot of buy-in and selling with your teams
Yeah,
and also with your peers. Like if you can't achieve your vision and mission if you don't have the buy-in from your other team members or other PMs in your organization. And that's where even at EA, like that's where like we spend most of my time like setting up that vision and communicating that vision and by getting buy-in for that vision is the one of the most important things I see as a PM in EA.
yeah,
And next is more about like how do we get there? Like how do we get to that vision? Like where are we going to invest and understanding that strategy of like which products are you going to invest in? Like which problem areas are you going to invest in? I think that's where the strategy comes in. And I think this is where it gets a little bit more top down in terms of like there might be more urgent needs in terms of for leadership, like to work on something. Let's say for example, like there's a FIFA game that's getting launched, and you need to you need to be mindful that this is something the company needs. There's an
yeah.
immediate need for it. So do are the investments? How should we bucket our investments? Should we focus more on it now or on it later? So this is kind of like where you need to use your judgment and also use your persuasion skills to get work with your leadership and try to find the right balance in terms of achieving your long-term mission, but at least and again solving the near-term problems for the customers.
And in
So
terms of like timelines and roadmaps, when you're working in the gaming industry, are you somewhat tied to the release timelines of games? So would a game potentially be, delayed because they were dependent on you having built some functionality that they really need as part of that game? Or are the two things quite decoupled?
there is definitely a dependence,
Yeah.
like especially the things that you factored in, like for the game launch. Like let's say you said like it in like in let's take and go back to the example of FIFA. Like you said like in new FIFA that we are going to launch this, like it's important that we should deliver it to the customers like what we promised. But there's also cases like where like let's say performance improvement, like you want to make FIFA faster, things like that. Like those kind of things are still a little bit, yeah, you have a little bit of leeway in terms of like the timelines, and you can adjust based on uh, based on your other priorities.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. And then if we move on to a your team setup,
Mhm.
what does a typical team look like for you?
I think in some of the main, like obviously it's engineers. There are like a lot of engineers in the team, like at least 1:4 ratio, I would say, for a PM. And we also have UX designers. So there'll be a UX designer who will be working with you. There are situations like where I work with multiple UX designers because I'm running multiple improvements on the or like releasing multiple features at the same time.
Yeah.
So like generally having one UX designer for one stream of work really helps because they have like a very long-term vision of like how does the UX should look like and how the experience should look like for customers. And obviously you have partners in terms of engineering managers and like there are also data scientists that help us with gathering data. There are like we also have like the uh, in a way the titles are different, but I like it's like a product marketing manager kind of roles, like where they help you with launching of the features, like how to get the feature to your customers, like whether it could be a studio or whether it could be a I don't know, like if it's an internal team that wants to use this feature too, like need to have like a someone who goes and advocates for your product internally and also externally.
Yeah, that
So
makes.
that's the typical team setup.
And do you split out the role of product managers? Some companies will have a more kind of a product management role and then a product owner role and then a project manager role potentially. Is there any, I know you mentioned the product marketing manager who does that, but is there any, sometimes some companies will split that out into kind of the PM role, which is more strategic, and then a project manager role or a product owner role, which is more to do with like the day-to-day task management. Do you guys do any split like that?
Yeah, glad that you brought it up. I think I completely forgot about it. Like
Okay.
we do have a program manager
Program
who,
manager as well.
yeah, like I partner with along with the engineering managers on the delivery. Like they are like I think your engineering manager, your program manager are like your real assets to have. Like they help you a lot, like in delivering the vision and mission for the team.
Perfect. So this is what a typical team looks like for you, is it?
Yep.
And how many engineers do you have? Was it four that you mentioned, or?
Yeah. Currently, I'm in a different situation, but right now I have like 1:8. Like this.
Okay,
Like yeah, it's a big team. Like we
that's a big
work
team.
on a lot of different projects.
How do you find that because sometimes I've worked with, when I've worked with an engineering team, sometimes that can make things actually less productive. What is your ideal ratio? Would you say, what is your ideal number in terms of engineers in your personal experience?
Uh, I would be honest, like I have a little bit of different perspective on that. I'm a person like who wants more things to be done, more products to be delivered. So
Yeah.
I keep going. I actually enjoy working with more engineers, although it takes a lot of time. But it also depends on the problem area. Like in my case, like there are like at least 4 or 5 work streams that where it can be worked independently without any dependency on each other. But in the past, I've seen like where one engineer kind of needs, if working on it, like someone else has to step on their work. And as a former engineer, I had a background as an engineer too. Like I
Yeah.
don't like that. So it depends a lot on the product area itself. In my product area, like since it's a bigger product and also it needs a lot of different work streams, I really think this is a good ratio.
Okay. And then finally, what is your software development process? How does this work?
So we do 2 week sprints. So every quarter we kind of assess a little bit around our goal, like set up our goals, and then we we do the backlog grooming like at the beginning of that. But it's more iterative process. Like every 2 weeks, like we go to the backlog and see like what's important and the sprint planning. We have excellent program and engineering leads who help me with that. So that's generally 2 weeks of uh, Scrum.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And what is your favorite way to work?
And that's a good question. In fact, I have experimented with different processes, like where like setting up like backlog very detailedly planned beforehand. I see that that is a way that works sometimes if you are working on a technical project, especially let's say
Yeah.
that we are working something on improving like the speed or like or making like releasing some SDKs or releasing API things like that. I think it really helps there, like to keep the team focused on that, like if you really know what your long-term goal is. But like if you're getting a lot of change or churn or from the I don't know, like let's say a lot of change from management or like a lot of change in terms of customer features or like bugs and things like that. So I think having a 2 week sprint really makes you adapt to that faster change and learn from it.
Perfect. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like some people, I think the good thing about Scrum is that it's also it allows you to change every 2 weeks if you need to, but it's also quite predictable as well for more senior execs. That you get something at the end of a sprint. We were looking at something called Shape Up, which is a methodology that some product teams use. Like we sent out a survey quite recently, and Shape Up was something that came up quite a bit. Like the most common was 2 week sprints in Scrum,
Mhm.
but there was about 10% of people who said they use Shape Up, which is basically it's methodology. I don't know if you know about it, but I didn't know too much about it. But it's invented by the guys at Basecamp, and then you work in like 6 week sprints.
Yeah,
So rather than 2 week sprints. So I've never had any. I personally haven't had any experience of that, but it sounds like quite an interesting methodology as well, like extended. But I would imagine that like sometimes in a 2 week sprint, the work all gets left till the last week. Um,
yeah.
I would imagine in a 6 week process that just gets magnified even more. So I don't know how productive that makes people, but interesting one. So yeah, so thanks very much for giving us a bit of background as to your overall process. Shall we move on to your product stack now?
Yeah, definitely. So at EA, I think at EA, like one of the main things that we rely a lot on communication is through one pages.
Yeah.
So every communication that we try to have with our peers or with our engineering team, we try to be as concise as possible and also keep it written a page. The main reason for that is like we want to get as much feedback as possible. I think once the docs get bigger and bigger, we don't see a lot of people reading it and also maybe going to the first page and not glancing through that and never coming back or never getting the real feedback on it. So especially for communication that needs feedback, like let's say the setting up a vision or like what is a strategy or like any kind of uh, things that we want to have where we want to get solicited feedback, like we rely a lot on one pages. And for anything that we want to communicate with the engineering team in terms of like PR, in terms of like new products and stuff like that, we rely on product relay PRDs, product requirements document. So a lot of work, like for me, like especially after the planning phase or in the middle of the quarters or in the middle of the sprints is spending writing PRDs. So that is like we don't have any limit on like how big the PRD should be, but we also want to keep it shorter so that the engineering team tries to understand like what's the most important thing we need to do and also try to at the same time like make sure that we cover all the edge cases. So it's about like more around concise communication and as as much information as possible, which is like opposite goals, but try to balance that.
Perfect. Yeah, we've had a couple of different people just mention, PRDs and FAQs and things like that in a one-page document. And so it's yeah, interesting that you mentioned that as well.
As you can see, like we use Miro a lot. We find it a very good collaboration tool, like if like in terms of the tools that we use within the company,
Yeah.
especially for whiteboarding or any kind of creating rough mockups like that we
Mhm.
want to communicate. It's a very nice tool that we find. So yeah, I just want to go through one of the frameworks that we use for product discovery, and this is like what we want to have within a PRD. So I I know like one of the like after you set your strategy and after you set your product areas, like the one major thing like where you as a product manager work is like discovering like what features to build and what products to go after. And one of the main things that we want when we look at is who are the customers that we are targeting, especially in the gaming world. There are like so many different kinds of games. They can be single player, multiplayer, like they can be games that reach millions of people. There are games that are more like mobile and like are a little bit smaller that target smaller set of people. And there are games that go on iterating like FIFA that start with one and then they have a second version of it, third version of it, things like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding like who your customers are like is the main important part of the discovery and like understanding what the problem that they're having.
And is that
They,
like, sorry to interrupt, is it
yeah,
so that I'm guessing, like, I don't know too much about the different types of games that EA has, but I'm guessing that that changes could change quite dramatically depending on the genre of the game. So as someone who plays FIFA, isn't the same as someone who plays, I don't know, a different Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know what
yeah.
other games EA has, but so that, as a PM, do you then have to consider the audience of the specific game, or are you thinking more broadly at an EA level? How does that work?
It is like it's also important. Like for example, the obvious segmentation, like the one that you talked about, like someone who plays FIFA and someone who plays like something like let's say Madden or some
Mario,
other,
yeah.
yeah, Mario, might be completely different. And like the obvious segmentations might work, but it also we also need to. This is where like you as a product manager has to go deeper and understand from the user research and the and your quantity data, like what is something that they all have in common. Like
Right.
let's say for example, like if you're targeting you someone who plays FIFA and someone who plays Mario, and what do they both have in common? They both probably want to like buy something. Like they want to buy an additional packs on top of, let's say, Mario. Like they want to buy some Mario pack on top of it. FIFA, they want to buy something FIFA on
Yeah.
top of, like, let's say, a trophy or something like that. So understanding that kind of segmentation needs like a lot of digging deeper into your data, and that's where like talking to your customers, like conducting customer research, and also having a good SQL skills help you, because then you don't have to depend a lot on your data scientist, and you can keep trying different stuff. And that's something that I feel very handy, especially when you're trying to dig through the data. And that is where the difference you can make. Like I feel as a PM, like instead of understanding data on the top level, like going deeper and understanding the customers and understanding the problems, that's where the most of the time I spend in, and that's where I get most of the value and where I discover newer products and features.
Perfect. And how do you do user research in your role?
Um, there are a couple of ways. Like one, as I said, like there are like product marketing managers in my team. Like I try to use
Yeah.
them and reach out to the customers and like try to set up interviews with them. There are also like secondhand information you can get it. Like for example, sometimes like when studios or anyone is using features, they might be sharing that feedback with the product marketing manager. So interviewing them themselves, like it's also a good source of feedback, and like it'll give you like a 360 overview of like what the customer is thinking. So it's a lot about like talking to them, like also being a little bit intentional about like what you want to get out of them. Like this is something that I learned over the time. Like initially I would just go into the meeting and talk and like try to understand stuff, but or like so I think taking a step back and understanding like what questions that you need to get answered, and what are some things that you have a more deeper questions around, like trying them like writing them down beforehand, and like making the conversation going towards the direction. I think that's all like with doing and like with practice that comes to you. But I think that's
Yeah.
the main thing, like trying to get as much information as possible.
Do you have a dedicated user researcher role or not?
Not in my current team. So in my current team, I go and do the research. But yeah, there are some parts of the teams that do have support.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect. Okay, cool. Should we go back to your doc?
yeah, sure. Yeah. So these are the three things that we try to have in a product discovery document. Like any new feature, like making sure that we have complete understanding of the customers, the problem, and what do we expect to change. And this is like I some people call it
Could
what
you
are the
zoom in a little
benefits.
bit? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Perfect. Thanks.
So yeah, so this is something that some people call it like what benefits do you expect from the customers, or like to the company, to you, or to the customers themselves. So like having that all captured in, and having that like why do you think that it's going to happen? Like let's say that you are building a chat feature, like why is chat important? Like what problem are you solving for the customers, and what do you expect to change? Like do you expect customers to play more games, or like do you expect them to like probably buy more of your games, like or like will it increase revenue for your company? Like understanding all that aspects of like why this problem is important and how you're going to solve, like what benefits you expect by solving this problem. I think that's also very crucial in after understanding the problem and the customers.
Yeah,
So
that's
this is,
quite a nice way to frame it, isn't it? Gets you to
yeah,
think about the potential future state and it acts as a good filter to be able to understand whether this is actually worth solving or not.
yeah. And whether it aligns with your strategy too, like whether you, as a
Yeah.
company, is it something that you're going after, and that's important to like have that perspective.
Perfect.
This is something that we generally do in the discovery process, but when it comes to also like like the existing features or feature releases, something that we also do is around hypothesis testing. So this is depends a lot on how you like different ways you can test, but it's always something in my team that we always encourage, like what is the hypothesis that you have right now, like is this something that something backed by the data or something backed by qualitative data, and how can you test that whether this hypothesis is right or not. So one example I can give is like, by let's say that adding a chat feature, like one benefit that we are promising is more people will play multiplayer games. How do you know that? Like, is that it's probably something like you backed by the qualitative data, but it like how does that play in the real world with all the market conditions and everything in hand? Because you probably might be missing, or you might be missing some data points, or your customer is not behaving as they said. Like, so how do you get to how do you get to test that? Like that is where you use hypothesis testing. There are like several different methodologies that we use. A/B testing is one popular one,
Yeah.
and there's also sometimes that we use blackout kind of testing, like where we kind of expose the feature to people to expose the feature for some time and black out that and see like what how was the effect on it, like is the effect like more is there any effect, like are they feeling any effect of removing that feature, or they or is there no effect on the customers themselves. So that is, and we spend a lot of time in learning that, like defining those metrics and learning from those metrics, because these learnings are generally also go into your another hypothesis, and it keeps on getting into that loop, like where you learn more and more about your customers while still delivering good products.
And where do these hypotheses typically come from? So you mentioned the example of, okay, well, maybe I think adding chat features is going to increase the number of multiplayer games or whatever.
Mhm.
So let's just, where would something like that come from? And how do you go about prioritizing all the different ideas that everyone has? Because we all know that PMs are inundated with all these different ideas. Do you have a specific way of kind of thinking, okay, well, we've got all these hypotheses, which have been generated by team members, let's say, and then how do you then decide which of those is worth pursuing?
Definitely. I think one major thing about a hypothesis is like again thinking in terms of like what's the problem and who are the customers. Like in a way, like for example, if the chat feature is going to solve the multiplayer work, like who are the customers for that? Like like which segments of customers are we targeting in the hypothesis? And how are we backing up that this is going to help? Like do we have any, I don't know, like and like any quotes from customers that says this, or is this something like we saw an effect from a competitor? Like there could be several different ways that you can generate hypothesis. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be. It can be your instinct also. Like, hey, I think this is. If you do this, this might work. Like
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and it's completely fine. But as
Where do
long
they
as
come
like
from? Do they come from your team members or do they come from your gut instinct or is it a blend of everything?
I would say blend of everything.
Yeah.
We try to have a backup, like saying that like this there is some supporting evidence, because sometimes changing the color from blue to red might change this. If it might not be a very good hypothesis, unless I mean I'm not a designer, but maybe if there's a designer who says that this is like changing from blue to red kind of increase your conversion or increase your usage, like it could be something that we can trust, because they are probably more aware of this design, like colors and everything around that.
Yeah.
But
I once worked at an e-commerce business and the uh the guy in charge of like A/B testing just decided to run the most ridiculous like experiments where he like basically took the design and like changed loads of the elements without telling the designers. And like it looked really, really ugly, but
Yeah.
conversion like shot through the roof, and the designers were really, really annoyed that he hadn't consulted with them. And then we were all as the product team were kind of in a weird position because we were like, oh shit, like the conversion's gone up, but it
Yeah.
looks absolutely hideous. So it's a funny one, isn't it? Like things when you hypotheses around changing designs, it's quite a sensitive area, I think.
Yeah, and you should have I should have a learning for the hypothesis. Like I think that is one crucial thing that we emphasize in the team. Like hypothesis itself is not enough. Like, okay, if it goes wrong, like what are we learning from it? And if it goes right, like what are we learning from it? Because at the end of the day, this is an experiment, and it should teach us something that we can use for the future products. So yeah, to answer your first question, that like it's a blend of everything. Like we get hypothesis from like the team members and from gut instincts. And for prioritization, generally we look at like who like even for the hypothesis, like who are the customers, like how much effect do we expect to have? Like for example, like changing from blue to red, like if we expect to have 100% conversion increase, and that's backed by some sort of data, like we would prioritize based on the impact, like how much big impact is going to be.
And do you use any specific tools for either your discovery process or for your test or your experimentation process? Do you use things like feature flagging, or do you have any in-house tools or any third-party tools that you use as part of this process?
For the hypothesis testing, we have in-house tools we build in for
Yeah.
A/B testing and other kinds of testing. So we use experimentation that we have within EA.
Okay.
For product discovery process, like I would generally rely on Google Docs a lot. Like I spent a lot of time writing, going through iterations, and like finding like your manager or like so your peer and like iterating through it, like and let them poke holes through my logic, like why is this like if this is the right problem and if the right logic and everything around that.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Was there any other aspect of your product stack you wanted to share, or was that it?
Yeah, we also like use Figma and Tableau within our team.
Okay.
So Figma is mainly we try to do like quick prototypes, especially like if I'm working with a designer and whether we are brainstorming on something, like it's a very good tool to queue feedback and get feedback on. So that's something that we spend some time on, and Tableau to do any quick analysis of and also keeping track of metrics.
Yeah.
We really emphasize a lot on having a good North Star and primary metrics in the team. So any new feature or any product that we are building, we want to make sure that we have a right North Star and primary metrics so that we can keep track of them in Tableau.
You said you got North Star, and what was the second metric you mentioned? Sorry.
Primary metrics.
Primary metrics. Okay, cool. And we've spoken to a few people now, and some people have said that actually there's an expectation that PMs have at least some basic knowledge of SQL, and then some PMs are not. They'll just use a user interface to get the data, and they'll get the data scientists to do anything more complex. In your role, are you expected to have knowledge of SQL and pull your own queries or not?
No, there's no expectation in my role to have that.
Yeah,
Although I would say it's very handy to have that because, yeah, you need to find time in your calendar for your data scientist or your analyst.
yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have.
And how
Sounds
technical are PMs expected to be more generally at EA? Is there an expectation that you mentioned you came from a software engineering background, but is that an expectation that you should have as a prerequisite or not?
I think no, because lot of the PMs that I work with, I'm just trying to remember. Like I don't remember anyone other than me having software engineering background.
Yeah.
So it's not an expectation to have a software engineering background in EA.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, because PMs typically come from all kinds of different backgrounds, like like marketing, sometimes sales, business, or whatever. But then some companies will. I think I don't know. I'm not sure if Google still has that, but some companies still have the prerequisite, don't they? Where you should have they demand that you have a software engineering background.
Yeah. I think it depends on like which product area also. Maybe sometimes like if you're working on very developer focused product area, maybe it might help you. Like it's like, yeah, I don't have any strong opinions on that too, like because even you can learn anything on the job and still solve for like treat developers as a users and solve for them. But
What
yeah,
do
but
you
it
prefer?
helps. What do I prefer?
Yeah, do you prefer a software engineer or product manager?
Oh, I definitely prefer product manager. Yeah, I love my job, like especially getting to understand customers and learning about them. Everything, like every day, something new about them really is fun for me.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. And are there any other parts of your product stack that you wanted to share with us, or even outside of your product stack? Are there any other tools that you use on a day-to-day basis that you think, you know what, it's essential? If I could never live without that. So some people have said they couldn't live without pen and paper, for example. Some people have said that they use Jira for their personal lives. Some people have said there's lots of tools that they couldn't live without. Are there anything else apart from the stuff we mentioned? Is there anything else that you feel like you really couldn't live without that is worth sharing?
Yeah, for me, yeah, definitely. I also would add pen and paper. I actually doodle a lot with pen and
Okay.
paper, and one thing that I think like in a like especially like as a PM thinking of like a lot of the concepts that you have are generally not linear or like they require a lot of complex relationships between different things and I feel like it's better to first at least my style is to first have it doodle it like what does different things are like how they relate to each other making sure like build some mind map around that and then go and write about it if I want to communicate it or
Yeah.
if it's something like where I want to just share with my team members like I just take a picture of it and share with them like this is what
Okay.
I'm thinking about.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's good. Because these like Miro and Figma, they're brilliant tools, but they're just still not quite the same as like whiteboarding. I always love whiteboarding. But yeah, I guess but I could never really get back into like notepadding and just like some people use it for to-do lists, but I just don't find it as productive. But I guess for things like concepts and for wireframing and that kind of stuff, it's very helpful. So
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. Anything else that you'd like to share?
uh, I think, yeah, I would say most of the stuff like what I talked about, like around like product discovery and hypothesis and everything, I think we spend a lot of time on metrics too. Like I think I haven't talked a lot about it, but I would just say like that metrics are also one of the most important things.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. And if people want to follow you online, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Twitter? Are you anywhere else?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I can share my LinkedIn profile with you. And then I'm not that active on Twitter, but I'm on Twitter too.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thanks very much for spending some time with us today and for sharing your product stack with us. It's been really, really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Richard, for having me.